Welcome to your video guide to this primary maths workbook. We'll try and cover quite a lot during this video explanation, but I'd really encourage you to have a look at the guide within the workbook that we've put there and kind of flick through to the sections as I'm talking about them. You can get a copy of this workbook from our website in the tutors area, and you'll get a hard copy at your first session that you're tutoring with us. The way this video will be structured is I'm going to use the session plan that we've put together. And the reason we've put this together is to provide you with a really clear structure of how your sessions are going to look. The pupils also have a session plan with less detail in their workbooks, so they know what to expect as well. So we'll go through each section, I'll show you the part of the workbook it's referring to, and a few top tips of how to use that section. We've also put some timings, how long to spend in each section, what that means overall. Obviously, you might need to adjust it to different contexts. If you are working with two groups of pupils in one tutoring session, then you might need to spend slightly less time on each section. So let's get going. The first part here is the arithmetic practice. So it looks like this. There are 20 different arithmetic practice exercises. As you can see, they all look very similar. And this one is the tutor version, so you've got your answers in here. And the reason for the arithmetic practice is to help develop what we call fluency in these skills. So these are calculations that pupils will need to be relatively comfortable with and relatively quick at doing. So if a pupil is taking a long time on the arithmetic practice, or one particular question within it, just encourage them to move on. That's absolutely fine, because we'll have a look at another section where we try and sort of focus on one of these skills and develop that. But this practice is just about, getting used to those questions, repeating them. So as you can see, for example, here there's a long multiplication, and the next week they'll do another long multiplication. So it's just exposing them to these same skills week in, week out, and helping them, as I said, become fluent in them. Part of the advantage of having this at the start of your session is if one pupil is slightly late or delayed, the pupils can just get on straight away. So it's good to have a routine. Often we'll find the pupils by week 2 or 3, they start opening up. They know exactly what to do. Go to the arithmetic practice and get going. If you're worried pupils are copying from each other, you could ask one pupil 1 week to start off by doing A, C, E, G, I, and so on, do every other one, and then go back to do B, D, F. Or you could get one pupil working down, A, B, C, D, and one pupil working up from the bottom. So they start with K and work their way up. That's absolutely fine. Just encouraging pupils that it's not about competing with the other people in their group, it's about what they can do, and that's what we want to focus on. Now, we know that some tutors sometimes feel a bit concerned about what the methods are that pupils might use for this. So there is a section of the book called Suggested Written Methods. It's been put together by a primary teacher who's done a lot at Year 6, and we've tried to put in a few different methods that are common, and then also how pupils might struggle with this, or different things that you can try if they're not sure about it. So that's only in the tutor workbook. Please do have a look through that. So you've got to your session, you've done an arithmetic practice, which is brilliant. And then what do you do next? Well, next, hopefully by this point, both pupils you're working with are there. We think it's really important to reflect on the work that you did last week with them. So even if you didn't work with them last week, it's really useful to ask them a really open question about what they did, what was the math that they did in their tutoring last week, because this helps them reflect on what they did and try and encourage them to pull that out from their memory, and that helps with longer term retention. So it's quite low key. It's a little chat about what they did. If you did work with them, you might be able to prepare a question and just check in, do they still understand it? Because there's this kind of difference between have they really learned how to do something, or were they kind of we call it a performance. So you might show me how to add fractions, I can then mimic that and copy it, but I haven't really learned, it hasn't gone into my long-term memory. So this is an opportunity to kind of check that and see how they're getting on in a very kind of low pressure way. So it doesn't matter if they can't remember that, that's fine. You can then use that time to just remind them of a couple bits and pieces. So it's a reflection. There's no specific activities for that, because that will depend from person to person what you do with it. But if we now go to the next section. So skills practice here, you can see it now looks slightly different from the first week, so weeks 1 to 5, and week 6 onwards. And this is because the papers that pupils do at the end of year 6, there'll be an arithmetic paper, which is more of kind of the numbers are there. Can you do this skill? And then 2 reasoning papers, which is can you apply those skills? But before you can reason with maths, you still need to be able to do the skills in the first place. So the skills practice section has got loads of different types of mathematical skills they need, and you can use this. We've talked here about the gap report, which is a summary of how they've gotten in their baseline assessment. So you can use that to identify which questions pupils need to focus on. So if I skip to a particular section so you can see what that looks like. So here, this is the end of one section. We're going to focus on area of triangles and rectangles. So you can see here, we've picked out this question from the baseline, question 19 in the baseline. So you might look on your gap report and say, in question 19, your pupils got wrong. So you want to focus on looking at area of triangles and rectangles. So the first thing is to have a conversation with your pupil about the question. What was it that confused them about this question? What are they less confident with? You've then got a couple of worked examples that you can do, because it's not cheating to show pupils how you do this work. So you do the worked examples, and they can write that down as well. That's absolutely fine. They can either as it goes along, or maybe watch you do it and then write it down later. So the 2 examples are to show 2 different ways that question might be asked. And then you can see it goes through a series of stages. So first of all, work with your tutor to answer these questions. So you might be giving them quite a lot of support in these questions. Now work with your group, so that's with the other pupils that they're working with, so they can support each other. And then finally work independently. Because it's really important that we build up their skills so that they can do it by themselves and they can feel confident by themselves to answer these types of questions. And each of the kind of skills practice sections follow that same structure, slowly taking away the support until the point where they're doing a question successfully by themselves. So that's the skills practice. And you might do, if we go back to the session plan here, you can see it says pupils will complete 2 to 4 skills in one session. That's kind of the main meat of your session in those first 5 weeks. But what about week 6 onwards? What does that look like? So that is now moving from the skills. Hopefully they've kind of consolidated some of their learning from their skills. They've got those. Can they apply it to a context, to a situation? And that's the reasoning questions. So if we carry on, we were looking at area of rectangles and triangles. I can show you a reasoning part of our workbook here. So this gives them a kind of context about architects. They want to come up with a design for a workshop. How many different rectangular designs can they come up with that have the area of 18 meters squared? So this question relies on them there's not just one answer, there's several answers to it. So each of the skills that we're looking at and practicing, there's then a section of the workbook that looks at that in a little bit more of a context for them, because that's the part that pupils might find really challenging. If I flip back to the plan again, you can see, so week 6 onwards, again, that's the main part of your section. We'll be looking at these sorts of reasoning questions. And if we look at the contents, you can see we've got arithmetic, skills practice, and then here's our reasoning, and it tells you after each one what are the skills, these in italics here, so you can match up what's the most appropriate thing to be working on with your pupils. Now, the session plan shows that a brain teaser or a game. So these are something that you don't have to do every week. It probably depends a little bit on how your pupils finding the particular skills you're working on. Maybe they're just their mood in the session, how they are generally that day. But if you do feel like they need a bit of a break, then we've got some brain teasers and some games. So if I show you those, briefly. Our brain teasers, we've got about 10 different ones. Pupils quite enjoy different little puzzles for them to have a go at. And then we can also see the games that we've got, some suggestions. You can bring in other ones as well, that's absolutely fine if you know some that work really well. But we've got some suggestions of games that you could use. And these work well with pupils. Again, they get into a routine, so there's some games that you might play each week at a certain point in the session, and it can be a nice motivation for them as they're going through. So if we scroll back down, we might have a little break with the brain teaser or game. We'll go back to either the skills practice or the reasoning questions. And then at the end of the session, it's really important to wrap up the session really nicely. So a plenary, and all that means really, if we scroll down here, we can see it's just an activity that kind of summarizes or consolidates learning that's happened. So we've given you some guidance here, which I'll let you read through by yourself, about what makes a good plenary, why it's important. And we've given you some ideas as well of what you might want to try as a plenary. And you can try different ones, and it will often be that certain pupils enjoy some more than others. So be creative and see what works for your pupils. But it is really important to wrap up the session clearly and make sure, have they understood what you think they've understood in this tutoring session. So as you can see, that's taken us all the way through our tutoring session from the arithmetic practice at the start, doing some reflection, a bit of skills practice or reasoning, and that will all build up over the course of the tutoring. A break if the pupils need it, if they're getting a bit tired, and making sure we wrap up the session really neatly at the end, so that we can reflect and work out what have they understood from this session, what might you need to take away and put into your planning for next time, what you're going to work on next week. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of our primary maths workbook. We hope that makes sense. We hope you enjoyed tutoring with us. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch. And thank you so much for giving up your time to tutor with us.